Back to your name.
Okay. Andy Fish, born native New Yorker, 40 years professional investor, half family offices, half institutions, half hedge funds, half venture funds. We build SPVs as co-invests with partners for a group of family offices.
Where are you going tonight?
Where am I going tonight? I think I need to go to Barcelona.
I'm doing stopwatch. Your news that I will be up on the floor.
I pretty forgotten we're supposed to be, where we're from, where we live.
Name, company, base questions.
Okay, I'm Christine Wolf. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. We now live in DC and New York. And company, Medici Land Governance, we've been dealing with property rights, access to homeownership all over the world, including Africa, and now the United States. We have a project in Baltimore to address their vacant housing issue and try to flip those into affordable housing or access to homeownership in our very difficult real estate environment right now. And we use technology for all of these.
And where do you want to go tonight?
I'm a creature of habit, so I would like to go back to Hong Kong. I used to live in Hong Kong for 5 years.
Great. You want to go, Eddie?
Sure, fresh out of the rain.
15 seconds.
15 seconds.
Cutting down.
Yeah.
Jesus. Is Jack Wyans 15 seconds?
Let's go.
Eddie Vanderpart, running a early stage platform for clean tech and agri-tech, anything to decarb the environment. Live in the Upper West Side, was born in Groningen in the Netherlands. And I'd like to go to Sunderland, UK.
Because
There's a fascinating waste to fuel plant there that I want to look at.
all right, cool. We're gonna talk about algae to oil again.
Yes, we can do that too.
Mike?
Let's press play.
My name is Michael Moskides. I'm born in Stoughton, Massachusetts. I live in Upper Westchester, New York for the past 25 years. I'm owner and founder of Aptus Group, which I've had for 12 years. I'm formerly an IBM pricing strategist. I worked at Salaam Brothers in prime brokerage on the alternative asset side. For the past 12 years, we've engaged on the finance front and technology front in investments and working with groups that seek capital. Right now, as an example, I'm working with a group out of Maryland that has a beautiful patent involving, security nodes for gateway communication, up to 1,000 nodes within a building. And I'm most interested in security these days. That side of technology really interests me, and that connects with the real estate side of this discussion.
And where do you want to go tonight?
Home to my family. I'm a Greek American, so it'd be nice to take some time back in Athens.
Bill Marcus, in Chicago, born in Queens, across the river. I would love to go to probably Kenya or either Kenya or Nigeria. I haven't been to Africa yet for a guy that's very focused on Africa.
Yeah.
And I hear so many great things, and I'm sure it's in my future very nearby. What excites me.
That's second round.
I got to tell you one more thing about Africa, because no one's saying anything about Africa or real estate.
That's second round. We're just introducing ourselves.
All right, fine.
Next.
That's me. Hi guys, I'm Abhinav from the UK. So I was actually born in India, but moved to the UK when I was quite young.
Where in India?
Kerala, down south. And I run a company called 3D Portal. We do 3D printing back in the UK for Formula One teams and a couple of other motorsport industries. And I'm trying to break into aerospace and defense at the moment. It's a place I'd like to go is potentially Mauritius, just to switch off for a couple of days, because I haven't done that for about 5 years now. But
Okay.
Hi, Slater Chityala. I'm born in Melbourne, Australia. I now mainly in New York, but split my time between here and Singapore. We have
I'm
a,
gonna be, because on Thursday next week, we have a morning roundtable in Singapore.
yes, my father's going to be there. I think.
Oh, good.
Good. Great. So we invest through both the venture fund and our family office. Now we mainly focus on company development, where we work with a handful of companies where we know the founders very well, bring the domain experts and the capital in. One company is a payments business using sound-based authentication. It's in India and Southeast Asia. I think a lot of that can be applied in Africa. And then we also have a data company that helps bring visibility, especially to emerging markets, or companies looking to invest or expand there, as well as helping make sense of deluge of information in places like US and Europe. And tonight, actually, one of my favorite new cities is Tbilisi, Georgia.
Why is that?
It's one of these places you wouldn't expect. It's kind of intersection of Asia and Europe culturally. It's kind of got mixes of both of them. Has some historical relevance.
Yeah. I had an $800 phone bill in Tbilisi in 1999. Trying to send an email.
And say, I'm surprised you got a phone
Half
call.
the email.
$5 per kilobyte.
Mark Sainer, 361 Firm founder. I was born in Newark, Ohio. I now live in Short Hills, just outside the city. And tonight, going to Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's time to go back. You?
Stephen Burke, Harris Investment Partners. I'm the managing partner. Born in New York, live in New York. And if I could go anywhere tonight, I'd like to go to LA, see my kids.
There you go. Speaking of LA, I'm going across my rows. I see Sanji. Probably not everyone else's, but there you are. Introduce yourself.
So my name is Sanjeev Rao. I live in Manhattan Beach, Los Angeles area. I'm an AI expert turned founder, and then now I'm an investor, investing across all stages and sectors as well. Where I'd like to go, I'd never been to Kenya for a safari, so I'd like to go there.
All right. David Solomon.
So I'm David Solomon, and as you know, working in Africa on nation building and regional development. I was fundamentally driven by the paradox of poverty on massive unrealized wealth and how to maximize the quality of life for the greatest number of people. My background, I started in Salomon Brothers, fixed income. Business management, that was taken over by Citigroup. Then I went out to work in Asia and off to the independence of South Sudan, where I got involved in how to develop essentially these regions, how to not just lift them out of poverty, but really create a strategy that generates massive returns. But then you have the issue of stewardship, making sure that those funds are best invested back into the right kinds of projects. So in general, this is my life's work. I look forward to sharing it with you. And tonight I would go to, there's a sacred plateau hidden in Sinai. Very few people know about it, where the stars, you can see all the stars. It's pristine sky, and it's one of the most wonderful places in the world.
What's your organization, Solomon?
So we have the World Indigenous Forum and BES, and we're partnered up with Ubuntu in this joint venture.
Excellent. So I see Zarin.
Where are you from originally?
Sorry, you off?
David, where are you from? Where were you?
I was born in London. My family is Jewish Berbers from Morocco, and on the other side, Egypt, and my mother was born in Sudan. I feel some
backgrounds. Yeah, we should.
We'll talk. We'll talk.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you can go next.
So yeah, so Yoav, I was born in Israel, just outside of Tel Aviv. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I spent the best part of the last 20 years working in Africa in different executive capacities. I was CEO of a few companies in the energy sector and kind of project building and impact investments. Then I was also in a private equity firm that did impact investments exclusively in Africa. And right now I'm kind of independent consultant and also involved with a few ventures also in Africa. And tonight, I would love to go back to Tel Aviv so I can spend Passover with my family if I could.
Thank you. Thank you.
Zarin?
So I was born in Istanbul, and currently I live in Zurich. I have a banking background and right now focused on strategic partnerships and business development in finance sector and e-commerce. And when Solomon was giving his detailed answer, I was like, that's the Turkish way. We'd say like our mother, our father. And yes, I come from mixed background as well. And I would like to go to a spa retreat.
Anywhere? Spa retreat?
Where there is sea, yes. Caribbean. preferably.
Has anyone been to San Sebastian in Spain?
Yes, many times.
Oh. That's also a really nice seaside spa retreat.
Absolutely, and fabulous food. I even had a cooking class there.
Well, why don't you go ahead then, Margaret?
Hi, I'm Margaret O'Connor. I am the chair of Launch Africa Ventures, which is the biggest institutional seed fund focusing on early stage African tech companies. So Solomon, when you were talking about indigenous, so 90% of the founders in whom we invest are Africans, which is somewhat unusual in African venture capital, and 25% of the founders are female. So it's a commercial first fund, but we have enormous impact. And I spent my early career in Asia, so I'm riffing on a lot of what was said earlier. I was interested, where was it going to go to? Oh, born in New York, I live in London. And tonight, I think I'm going to Lamu in Kenya because I'm really feeling like the need to swim and sail in warm water for a change. Like, the cold water swimming in Hampstead Heath is getting on my nerves. And just, who said Sunderland? Was that Eddie?
That was Eddie.
Eddie.
Yes.
My cousin was a very Irish family. My cousin was a Sunderland Premier Football League general manager. She was the first female general manager of English. So she took me up to Sunderland. I'm like, oh my gosh, this place needs economic redevelopment if I've ever seen one.
I'm having to catch a game there.
Yeah. I feel like we should do a tour, football.
Yes.
Tour.
See if he's over.
So, go around later.
Hi everyone. I'm Leslie Bendig, born in the US, but like Margaret, grew up professionally overseas, starting with Asia and then Africa. I'm currently toggling between the US, Holland, and South Africa, completing a project for an Africa-India focused VC out of the Netherlands, helping them with their fund exit program. And if I were to do something tonight, I think I'd go for a night dive in Sulawesi.
People take some long trips for a swim.
Well, it's free, right? So no, it helps.
So otherwise, finishing up on the Zoomers, we'll come back to some new people here. Who
That's
is
Star Trek.
Hi, Yvonne, do you want to speak, or RB14? Who's Go ahead, Yvonne.
Max Verstappen.
Go ahead, Yvonne.
Odds on mute.
Yeah, you came off mute a second. I thought you did. Who's RB14? If you don't announce yourself, I have to remove you.
Hey, Mark. Sorry, I'm just wrapping up a call. I couldn't be able to be there. It's Rich. How you doing?
Oh, hi, Rich.
Sorry.
Yeah, just Quick,
Just
quick.
driving in the car. I apologize, but I wanted to at least
Yeah.
stop
Just
in.
introduce yourself. City you're born in.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Rich. I do angel investing, and I work with a bunch of small startup companies as well. I am born in Brooklyn, and if you can hear the ambulances, you know I'm in New York. So what else what was the other question? Are we good?
Where do you go tonight? Where do you want to go tonight?
Oh, where I want to go tonight? Let's see. At the moment, I don't know. That's really a tough one. I would like to find some place a lot warmer because it got a lot colder here in New York. And since I'm going to go visit my mother tomorrow, I'd like to go someplace probably by myself and just and zen out for a moment. Yeah, just because I need to, before I get all the guilt, I need to get my strength.
So we have some new people. Chris Wood.
Hi, I'm Chris Wood. I am the president of a healthcare company called Impact Health, although I'm spending most of my times these days on some graphene and waste to energy projects. Born in Cincinnati, grew up in Jersey, live in Jersey City strong. If I could go anywhere tonight, it would probably be during Italy, and I'd have a big fat bowl of pasta.
Nice.
Or Austin and go to Salt Lake Barbecue. I'm craving both, so
And two people that we haven't met.
Hi, I'm Emily Salveson. I am the CEO and founder of Streamline Global. We are a tax incentivized investment company across a number of asset classes, including film, solar energy, hydrogen, low-income housing, opportunity zones, you name it. On the film side, I have built the company to be the number one equity finance company in the entertainment industry by 3x volume in the last 8 years. And I'm also
How do you define that?
We invest more equity in films via our investors using tax incentives more than anyone except for studios. And right now I'm kind of looking at a pivot or an addition into something other than tax equity finance, TBD.
And where are you going tonight?
Oh my God. I'm going to Como Parrot Key in the Turks and Caicos, which is a private island that has a beach that has literally no one on it and crystal clear waters and fish. And I'll see you later. Yeah.
Send a postcard.
Perfect.
I'm Golden Smith. I just jumped on board Streamline Global. I'm from Valdosta, Georgia, which is in the south of the state. Tonight, I would like to be playing tennis in South Florida.
Oh, you're good.
Where you born? Where you?
Oh, from Valdosta, Georgia. It's like 20 minutes from the Florida line. And then I live between LA and New York right now.
So one time we were selling sawmills in Georgia, Perry, Georgia. And we were with these 3 New Yorker private equity guys, and we left the mill and we had a German driving to the airport. We're just talking. We crossed the Florida border the wrong way. We're heading right towards your.
I had a great friend on the Army base there for a bunch of years.
Oh, the Air Force Base. Nice.
Air Force Base.
That's right. You hear a lot of those planes. Did we get everybody?
We good.
Oh, yes, you.
Ali Husseini, I'm the founder of Medici Land Governance. I think Christina talked a little bit about it. We trying to change the way real estate is done globally. 6 out of 8 billion people don't have formal ownership of their homes, and people that have ownership don't know how to get capital and extract that money out of it. So we're trying to resolve those issues. I was born in Lebanon. I grew up in Utah and living in DC and New York these days.
How'd you get to Utah?
I got to Utah because when I was a kid, there was this white guy that used to come to Lebanon in the 80s named Patrick Byrne. His father was the CEO of Geico, and he made Buffett his first $1 billion when he saved Geico out of bankruptcy in the 70s. And Patrick was starting Overstock, and he says, you come work in the warehouse, you make $6 an hour, you go to school, finish school, you go to university, and then I'll mentor you into becoming a real man instead of staying here in Lebanon doing nothing. So that's how I got to Utah. I got on the plane and went with him. Said yes. And started making $6 an hour and going to school and worked my way up. Became vice president of Overstock. And we were the first company to take Bitcoin, if anyone was interested in that space, in 2013. And we started investing into a lot of Bitcoin or blockchain meets technology meets Wall Street meets central banking. And I ended up cooking dinner for a guy named Hernando de Soto. He's a Peruvian economist on land rights. He wrote a book called The Mystery of Capital, and he argued that intergenerational wealth does not happen if you don't own property. And that's why his country, Peru, the richest country in gold back in the 16th, 17th century, never made it while the US made it because they formalized ownership. And he pushed for that. So I quit my work at Overstock, worked for him. And then 2 years later, I left Hernando and I started this company in 2018 to do this work around the world.
So we want to hear about that, but Yvonne has her hand up. I think she wants to figure out the.
I got it all together. So thank you so much for including me. Thank you so much, Bill, for sending me the information and extra follow-up. My name is Yvonne Berry. I'm based in New York City. I'm presently in Louisiana visiting family, an unfortunate situation. But the reason why I just wanted to speak here is because the topic is around Africa. And right now, as many of you know, I'm involved in lots of activities with the UN. I'm a focal point and have special consultative status with the UN. Right now, I'm on the financing committee for Nairobi. So if anybody here in the room is interested in supporting the Global South at the UN, coming up in a couple of weeks, and this is a planning for the Summit of the Future, which is a once-in-a-lifetime change over for the UN. I'm happy to talk to you further about what the opportunity is. I'm sending the information to Mark and Bill, and so we could all have a conversation about it afterwards, because I would like Bill and his team to speak about what they're going to be speaking about. But
Yvonne, what is it again?
So there is in order to support the Global South and the youth in Africa and marginalized organization and indigenous communities as part of civil society to contribute to a new agenda for the UN called the Pact for the Future, which leads to the Summit of the Future in September, which is restructuring and reorganizing key focal areas of the UN around the SDGs and other global governance for the UN. There are there's a chapeau, and there are 5 areas, and all the countries are participating in this to make this shift of different focal areas. This particular one is taking place in Nairobi at the UN in Nairobi, Kenya. So there's a UN location there. It's usually UNEP that has events and activities there. And there will be over 2,000 NGOs, government agencies, businesses and others participating at the UN at an actual UN event. It's not a private event. It's hosted by DGC, Department of Global Governance Communication. Anyway,
Can we do a mobilization call where Bill's people and our people can all?
Yes. And I have people that really explain it way better than I am. They're all part of the committees, co-chairs and think tanks and other groups that are leading this. So I don't do it justice. But yes, thank you so much, Mark, for the opportunity to do so. And we could do that as soon as tomorrow. I will send the information and then
Let's throw it in the chat. I feel like before we go to round 2, is everybody's spoken? I think so.
Ramadan, Sam.
Oh, Ramadan.
Leslie hasn't.
No, Leslie didn't.
Ramadan, you're on mute.
He wants to go to
He
the
just
dive.
came in, and then Douglas
Yeah.
is joining.
Hey, Ramadan.
Hi, how are you? Shall I do my introduction?
You know, the basic one. You can skip, you can't do the fun facts yet about 69.
Okay. Well, I have another fact. That's old news.
That's right.
My name is Ramadan Amin. I'm the CEO for the Americas and Central Asia. Our global business is U-Tribe. We focus on in English we leverage real world asset tokenization to prepare the financial foundation for international development across Africa, primarily to make it possible for African countries to participate international development, specifically as it relates to regenerative. So that means financing through pre-sales and financing with financial instruments that are de-risked through providing additional liquidity to traditionally liquid assets.
Got it. Well, and where do you want to go tonight?
I want to go to Dar es Salaam. I want to see the ports of Dar es Salaam because they're exciting, amazing, and I believe that they need massive infrastructure investment. And it would be cool to just see what they're doing now and some of the solutions that are in place because it's a very active port, but they don't have the necessary infrastructure that everybody else has.
Got it. Well, I don't think we run a lot of soup, Bill. Maybe.
Yeah, Rich also. Yeah, okay, good. Oh, yeah, RB. I mean, you know, it's great to have so many great people on the call. And Yvonne, thanks for making the effort. You were great in Davos, a super connector around the world. And Steve, thanks for hosting not only today's lunch, but many lunches and having the longest running commentary on economics of value that I know of on the planet.
Including in the south side of Chicago.
In the south side of Chicago. It's great to have Ramadan join us from Washington and David Solomon, who was my inspiration, along with Mike Milken in Africa, coming from Ibiza, another nice place to be going tonight. And Ali and his wife Christina, which are doing fantastic things in Africa and in the US in terms of making titling land efficient and all of the great economic boom that they can speak about. That derives. While we have, and we could have them start or Bess and Ubuntu, whichever one you feel is good with.
I yield.
Do you have a time constraint or not? Oh, we're good. Okay, good. I don't know who just joined. Anyone else? Okay, good. So let me begin with David and who created Bess and has been a friend of mine now for the better part of 10 years. Began with a conversation. I met him and he said, you must, I have some very important work. Can we meet with your friend, Mike Milken? Mike gave us the longest meeting we ever had. I ever had in my career of 20 years knowing him, 2.5 hours, because he said in his own words, loosely quoted, if we do not get Africa figured out and righted, the rest of the world, nothing we do in the rest of the world will matter. Our grandchildren and their children will be in turmoil forever. So that's what put me on this road. David had the sage viewpoint many years before that, and he has created and helped raise capital for Ubuntu, and both these organizations are doing fantastic, really unique, sustainable things to change people's lives. We have opportunities here not to just make ROI, but ROP, return on people, right? And that's the new measure and metric that I want to focus on. So I'll turn it over to since we are lucky enough to have both you on, David and Ramadan. David, if you want to begin and tell us a little bit about Bess and the overview and what the opportunities are, please take it away.
Thank you, Bill. That's great. Great to be with you all here. And when we started this out 12 years ago, and we were way ahead of our time, and we really looked at that paradox of poverty in Africa, regions that were trapped in famine and very difficult cycles, but yet we're sitting on massive unrealized wealth. And we tried to solve for one fundamental equation. How could we help them build their communities in a way that could maximize the benefits for the greatest number of people? And what you have and what's been built now with the timing and the recent funding raised and everything that's happening in the geopolitical climate is you have a situation which, quite frankly, you just don't encounter anywhere that I've seen in the investment world, to be able to impact this many lives and unlock this much wealth. But the driver, as Bill said, is we're very cautious with who we bring into the project. We look beyond, the capital to really to see whether people will be good stewards, whether they care about socioeconomic development, how we'll partner as a community to drive this forward, because the returns themselves are somewhat obvious. The way that we de-risk, we've gone to some of the best minds in the world, and Ubuntu have built an incredible team, organization, and structure, and are being entrusted with the tokenization of assets in several countries. There's two key countries, though, that I'd like to focus on. I just need to check how much time I have so I don't go on too long.
We like to keep it interactive, so maybe 3-4 minutes.
Okay.
5.
Okay, that's great. So these two twin engines are in Ghana and Uganda, the Ashanti Kingdom, which is the oldest kingdom in Africa, and Karamoja, which is essentially one of the oldest regions in the world. It's where you find the earliest remains of hominids, the birthplace of mankind. But as you go to that region, you find yourselves in a situation where much of the region is in famine, but they have everything that's needed in order to enable their economic development. And you see a cycle of wealth creation that begins initially with agriculture, with very solid partners. So we're not the implementers. What we do is it's like a simple ABC model. The assets which are being entrusted to us, the wealth of the kingdoms, then require the blueprints, essentially, the partners that can execute on and deliver on the ground, that have that track record. And that essentially brings in the capital. And then the regional strategy that Mike Milken and Bill have been discussing and was developed is essentially what de-risks and then enables it to widen this asset portfolio. But in the region of Karamoja, for example, there's 1.2 million people sitting on roughly $700 billion of unrealized wealth. That's about $583,000 per capita wealth. So you can look at that like an early stage of UAE, like 40 years ago or something. Now, saying that, some very trusted UAE investment partners would like to put the initial $1 billion into this at an 8% to 9% discount rate locked in over a 4-year period. And they're going to enable us to tokenize up to 10 to 20% of the region's wealth. Now, that's a vast volume of capital that will enable these two engines to start scaling up. And that's where Ubuntu becomes so fundamentally important. The opportunity at the moment is that Ubuntu invests into a fund structure called GEM, are going to introduce 30 million of capital from conscious stewards who believe add value to the journey and can help us navigate this better. Because our goal, essentially, the return on people, maximizing the value for the people, delivering the best quality economic solutions so that this can scale up to other regions. So in light of that, really what we're looking for is people who are interested in going the distance with us. You can exit. There are short-term opportunities and exit strategies where people can come out quite quickly. But the type of investors that we're looking for are the ones that understand the vast wealth and responsibility of the great number of people that are being entrusted into our hands, we are in service of. And so we have those tools and we have everything available and ready to go. But at the same time, I say with humility, this is just beginning. This is just beginning. And it's moving at quite a vertical trajectory.
Great. I mean, in summary, also, what drives people nuts, the travesty of people dying on land that's enormously rich in resources, right? That's the problem.
Starving.
Yeah.
Starving.
Ramadan, please, tell us about Ubuntu. Ramadan. There you go.
Can you hear me okay? There we go. Yeah. So thank you, Solomon. I think that's really good. I think you'll see after the three of us finish speaking about our businesses that you'll see that that there's just some natural synergies between all of these, because to invest in Africa, oftentimes there's an apparent risk and a need to either have boots on the ground or have additional transparency so that things become understandable. And so what we focus on at Ubuntu is the understanding and the assumption that there's a massive wealth in the ground across the various countries in Africa, and that is in the ground in natural resources, whether it be gold or copper or lithium, or insert the name of critical mineral here. But oftentimes what happens is there's a concession that's granted, and with that concession, the person that's granted that, typically not a local national, but someone who has access to the capital markets. With that access, they raise additional capital, and after they're done, they might have sold 20 to 50% of their rights, but in exchange, they now have a $1 billion asset, and of which 20% of sales would go towards the country or less. But it might be before the extraction process occurs. In the actual first transaction, we might be talking 5 years of development and off-take agreements before finally the country sees a cent of that. They get 25%. And so what that means is, in many cases, access to the capital markets is really the deciding factor, and who effectively gets to develop the mine. And again, we can talk about, just pragmatically speaking, that's really about risk, and those who take the risk get the rewards. But if you don't have access to capital markets or global capital markets, it's much harder. So what we do is we looked at that problem, and we looked at the challenge in general of how do you integrate and bring Africans at not just the institutional level or the sovereign level, but at the retail level. How do you bring them into the global capital markets arena, into the rest of the developing world? And you do that by leveraging digital ledger technology, specifically digital assets. And so what we do at Ubuntu is we leverage digital ledger technology to begin tokenizing what is traditionally an illiquid asset. And those assets fall into two categories. The first is gold, where we tokenize gold and make it possible for the retail market and retail consumer who's seeking to store their value, to be able to store their value by buying gold. And the second is we make it possible as well for the sovereign to tokenize their resources through an advisory, where we work with the Ministry of Finance, typically the president and their team, to allocate certain resources that are allocated to the government. And we then build with them an initiative that's typically 7 to 8 years long, where we then will transfer for equity positions of their portfolio. We will tokenize them, and then we then provide distribution capabilities and access to the distribution market or global capital markets, again, to raise the capital. That's done typically through collateralization of their revenues or tokenizing their in-the-ground resources at a discounted rate. So I can go into a dissertation on the topic, but generally speaking, it's leveraging, creating the background or the foundation for distribution by tokenizing yielding performing assets across Africa. typical size of the deals we do are 1 billion and up. Can you see me?
See your picture.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
All right, there we go. So a billion and up, and from our deal size perspective.
And what's the real world assets that you think is overall size under the ground in Africa?
Across Africa, I couldn't say with any reasonable degree of certainty, maybe 100 trillion, but again, that's anybody's guess. For specifically, a government figure would say, just was recently on the phone with the team that does the mining and minerals for the continent, and they said they've got $700 billion worth of unallocated concessions that can be tokenized, and that's just Nigeria. For the Ashanti Kingdom, it's 1.4 trillion. But I mean, we're talking about large numbers that they are not allocating internationally, and they are seeking to partner to tokenize those assets and generate a different form of revenue by pre-selling these tokenized assets, tokenizing a portion of the ownership. So instead of actually getting 25% of the revenues, they sell 25% equity, and based on those pre-sales can finance or begin the extraction process of the mines themselves. So it's just a different structure, but ultimately the result is the same. Instead of them exporting those resources and getting 25%, they export those resources and maintain 80% of the wealth in country. But the end user, the buyer, remains unchanged, right? So from an off-taker perspective, it's just a changing the script.
My last question, David mentioned the Ashanti Kingdom as well and Karamaje. What are you able to in closing tell us which countries you're involved with right now that of the 50?
Active conversations?
Whatever you can share.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, we are in active conversations now with 11 countries, typically the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Finance level, and sometimes at the president's level or the head of the central bank. Those that we are in active negotiations with to finalize contracts in late stages, 3 of those. The countries that I can sort of talk about, and then from there you can sort of fill in the blanks would be Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, Cameroon, Togo, the DRC, and obviously Uganda, as Salaam mentioned, and a few others that we're talking to that we just won't say. I think Solomon said it best. Ultimately, there's 2 things that need to happen. Like we can talk to, you guys know Ares Capital, for example. They might argue that they've got global distribution, but I mean, if you start narrowing on the conversation, talk about private credit, private lending in Africa, they might give you a story that amounts to we don't have people there on the ground, and I think that's fair, right? But ultimately, what it comes down to is how do you provide and how do you get that visibility and transparency that makes you comfortable? If we're talking about tokenizing either a performing oil field or a performing mine, you want to know how many people are working there. Is there extraction? Are they being paid? What is the operational cost? What's your procurement process? And is it transparent? How are you managing your budget? All of these things that are, I think, very reasonable if you're talking about performance of your portfolio. The leveraging real world assets gives you the ability to store the data and record the data in an automated fashion. So you have a level of visibility and transparency so you can see how the asset's performing. And that level of visibility allows us to begin insuring some of the revenue streams. And that insurance and having those revenue streams insured make it possible for us to feel comfortable raising a fund and seeking LPs as well as co-investment into purchasing these yielding these yielding assets, right? And that's why this is so exciting.
So without getting into the deals, because we're not
Yeah.
supposed to get into deals. But when I was in the emerging markets, you had the likes of the World Bank and the IMF, the IFC, and they would be a fund of funds. But the ironic thing is that they don't like to do mining because of the environmental aspects. And I'm just curious. And then you had OPEC, and now with DFC.
DFC, now DFC, Development Finance Corporation.
Yeah. So they were active, then they weren't. Now they're sort of active. China was not a factor 25 years ago. It's a huge factor in Africa today. So there's a whole different landscape. And it sounds like you have sort of the governments, the multilaterals aren't really there. Or maybe they could be. But then the second question is, who is the beneficiary? Is it the governments trying to be able to properly take on, encourage development, and therefore sort of capitalistic, just everything flourishes, or you are also trying to do this to the people? Like I'm hearing different themes.
Yeah. So I mean, I think so. The first question is who are the principal beneficiaries, and then why aren't there or are government institutions related and committed to aid there, and how are they operating? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Solomon, you want to tackle that first, and to clean up, or I'll tackle and you clean up.
Yeah, either way, I'll just say the people are the ultimate beneficiaries, and that's what so attracted me to Ubuntu's model. It took about 48 hours to raise and agree the initial capital because I understood it back to front. Ultimately, there's a landscape of partners there. What's lacking somewhat is coordination towards a united vision. That's why we started to build convening power like Financial Times Global Impact Summits, World Indigenous Forums. But I'll hand over to Ramadan to answer from he's got a very elegant and sophisticated way, no pressure.
Yeah, well, I thank you for that. As you say, just going a layer tactically deeper, from a revenue perspective, 10% of all our revenues goes towards setting up a regenerative fund. Our revenues are easy to track, and we're able to track that because the tokenized assets that we look at have stakeholders tied to those, and those transaction fees are assigned to those stakeholders. So it's easy for us to verify and validate that it's a regenerative model in terms of our revenues. That said, the reason why I'm not in person is because I am in DC, and I just got out of a meeting with what we would call, simply say, the Africa Czar, who manages and aligns the activity. I think under President Obama, there was an observation that sometimes projects that are intended to be funded, they could be funded, are being missed because there's no shepherd to shepherd them through a process. And so the Prosper Africa has created a process, and people are going through that door. So in that sense, there's now hundreds of millions of dollars that are now being deployed across Africa that represent a coalition of dollars, both from DFC, SBA, other USAID, but there are 17 aid organizations, and in general, they represent various mandates and departments that can deploy capital across Africa. So I would say they're there. At a later date for you, Mark, I'll see if we can put together like a chart on a map to see by if not by entity, by dollar amounts in terms of where across the continent they are. If that's helpful. The way we see it is ultimately the African narrative and story is inevitable. So in the theme of going where the ball is and going where the ball will be, it's important to be going and understanding and seeing where the ball is. And so we don't believe the perception of that risk in Africa is as high as it's perceived to be. And so when we think about our returns for our business, they're risk adjusted based on that basis. But ultimately, our product offering at the sovereign level for African countries is a stewardship product. It's a sovereign stewardship product, and our product offering on the sovereign level for the Americas or the developed nation, it's an impact model. So in both cases, driving impact requires a change in paradigm. We've got now new global players in the market that are operating on those interests, and if in fact the United States wants to continue to represent what we represent as a global commercial power and have since World War II, we need to effectively maintain trade relevance, investment leverage, and still maintain access to critical resources that allow our country to grow. And we represent a pathway for that. And we represent a pathway, in many cases, everybody in the room represents a pathway for end users, off-takers of those resources to guarantee access. That's still something that allows the country to lean in to these relationships.
You know, one of the things that you had me think about was Prosper Africa and the U.S. Aid Office had a big meeting in Davos to try and get family offices and people on a strategy together to help the world of investors understand that the risks are much lower than perceived. And it's kind of like when Mike Milken attacked the junk bond market back in the 70s and 80s, saying, hey, empirically, it's not what you think. The risks are much lower than regular bonds, and he created an entire industry that way. Similarly, it could be interesting, Stephen, from the economic background, to look at what's really the risks in Africa versus perceived risk, because they're completely mismatched from everything we're seeing.
There's a deal room that about Prosper Africa has a deal room, about 8,000 investors, and you can put your deal in through that system, just like JP Morgan Connect, and has family office and all of that, and then you can raise money.
That's right.
So that's a very in thing nowadays, but the ticket prices are much lower. Ramadan needs big ticket investment, so to get to where he wants to be.
Sarah, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just a quick question. Of course, I'm not at all an Africa expert, but when I sometimes talk with these people who work there, they say, like, what is Africa? There are so many countries. And when we say risk and regulation, different governments, they all have, their own, changing situations. How, like when you say the African risk, how do you exactly measure that? Like, because the French Africa is different, the Francophone, the West, and maybe from Nigeria. That was my question. With the negotiations, do you have like some common standards that you have when working with each country? How do you identify them and manage that risk?
Ramadan, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question.
Follow up. I have someone I'd like you to go first. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Why don't you go ahead and I'll clean up.
Yeah, so this is precisely the question we came to Mike Milken with, as Bill was saying. I said to him, look, you launched the high yield bond market, the junk bond market, and you enabled smaller, more risky companies to be de-risked so they could access large amounts of capital to take over more inefficient companies. And I said, look, Africa's sitting on this wealth. How do we de-risk this? And what do we do? And so it's not about an individual region. Anything can happen in one region over a course of time. That is the reality. And Mike was like, don't tell me otherwise. Anything can happen. So you need to start looking at a number of countries, and that starts to de-risk the portfolio across diversified asset classes. And specifically what we're talking about with this ABC, assets, blueprints, capital, these partners with their offtakes, with their credit ratings, that's what de-risks a lot of this strategy. So the more you get into the model, the more you understand that the legwork has been done. So, I mean, within Ubuntu's leadership team, there's about 100 years of experience, and Mamadou's last 30 years in economic development, whether as head of GE for economic development or working with the World Bank, push forward initiatives like Africa 2.0, where he led that initiative, and then Mandela came in and others, and they got 47 countries to ratify that new model. And so what you're looking at with Africa 3.0 here essentially is that Ubuntu is keeping 80 to 90% of the wealth in people's hands. And the reason we can change the game right now is there are many reasons, one of which is we know in the coming years there's a potential large-scale geopolitical conflict. There's going to be issues with food supply chains. There's going to be issues with accessing key resources. So Africa's unity and how they come to the table is really key. And so partners like Equity Group in East Africa, who are deploying 7 billion off their balance sheet across 7 countries, these kind of partners help us de-risk. And so the perceived risk, once you start to take it beyond a number of regions, and we looked at this analysis with KPMG, with others, McKinsey, what starts to become quite startling is the level of returns that can be generated. And then it really brings to an issue here, which we found, of stewardship. We're no longer in that situation where we're so concerned about how we de-risk region by region. We figured that part out. Now it's like, how do we bring in the right conscious investors and the right partners for the journey, looking for the long-term journey people. So Ramadan, over to you. Ramadan, you might be on mute.
Definitely on mute.
Yeah, thank you. So I believe the question has to do with how do we consider or think about risk across Africa? Is that a fair?
Yeah.
By country, those are talking initially.
By country. So I'm reminded of the famous Key and Peele skit where they had a Black Republicans conference where they said we are not a monolith and they all look the same. Do you guys recall that? Have you guys seen that before? I hear you guys laughing. That means you've seen it. Hilarious. And so on some level, I always sort of lead with that. Like the country's not a monolith. I do talk about, or the continent's not a monolith. I do talk about it sometimes like it's just one place. When if you were to look at a map and you can Google it, you can put India, Russia, China, and the United States inside the continent all at the same time, and there's still space left over. So like on some level, it's quite big. So the way I think of investment in general is it's a process and not an event. So every investor has their own perspective of what they want to see and understand, but ultimately it drives down to, have we consistently delivered a similar process every single time? And then investors can make decisions on what they drive decisions based on, not just returns to revenue, but probability associated with risk. So we'll look at the risk, we'll look at the returns, and then we'll effectively use a third party to evaluate the structure we put in place, which in many cases is just a financial instrument. So like that's the short version of that. So it's not a project by project. It is a project by project basis, but how we structure products is our process. And I don't want to get into too much detail because I just don't want to sidetrack people. But investment bankers come in, they structure the deal. We put the deal together. We look at the returns. We ensure the returns from a revenue stream perspective. And then we take that to market. We take it to market through distribution channels. The first distribution channel always is that we take it to the country, and the country invests in their own products first. If it's a $1 billion raise, we might raise $250 to $300 million from country or surrounding countries and region, and then the rest we take to the public market. And that's where you come in. So like if we were to do something with somebody in this room, it would be with an understanding that we would call like it would be a requirement that it would be a co-investment commitment. So it'd be an unfunded commitment. We show the capital, we show the first funds in, and then we do a capital call afterwards for your capital, and then it comes after that. So there are processes associated with how we anticipate and raise from the fund, how we deploy capital with the LPs that are defined by the standard investment policy guidelines. And we can go into greater detail around that. I want to make sure, like, I'm not sure if I answered your question the way you wanted to answer it, but I guess I just think that ultimately, let's just take Africa out of it and let's just talk about investment processes in general. We have a commitment and a fiduciary responsibility to meet our obligations and to what we say we're going to do. And obviously, the returns, if they're insured, amazing.
So,
if they're not insured,
Ramadan, I'm looking at Margaret. She's right above you, at least on my screen. Margaret
Good.
O'Connor. And I'm thinking
Hi,
Margaret, who's in, so she's investing in 22 plus countries on the venture level. But one of, I don't know if he's on your board or he's just an LP, but I'm thinking of Todd Rupert, Margaret, who was the ex-CEO of T. Rowe Price, sees the opportunity. And I'm just thinking, or he might have a perspective here. And you certainly have a perspective on risks and opportunities across the countries.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. So when we think about risk, it's, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So we are super focused on, as I said, investing in both frontier markets and the big four markets. There's been a valuation creep up in Nigeria and Egypt, like those are the two most highly valued markets on the continent. And so we are really disciplined about entry valuation. And Mark, you talked about some of our LPs. So many of our LPs co-invest in our companies alongside us and go on the advisory board of our companies. So we de-risk our investments by surrounding the company with the right local and global experts. And I have to comment, because when you guys were talking earlier about wealth on the ground, all I could think of is the people, right? Launch Africa is premised on the fact that the wealth on the ground is the people. And we're the bridge to global capital and global offtake. And I had, Mark, after the New York lunch that we had the most brilliant conversation with Amir from Egypt, right? So, you know, extremely seasoned health tech entrepreneur. And he woke up, he's like, okay, GCC is such an important player when we're thinking about geopolitical dynamics in Africa, right? I was on the ground in Africa for 20 years across the whole continent. And having spent my early career in China, I tried to get many listed companies to think differently about how they engage with China, you know, both institutional investments, doing deals together, mutual respect, that sort of thing, right? You know, I really thought China can be a force for good in many parts of Africa, but obviously they have, you know, retreated from the tech ecosystem for the most part. But GCC is absolutely hungry to work with funds like ours that provide complete geographic and multi-sector diversification to ensure that African talent are properly capitalized. And they want to see many of our founders working and setting up operating companies in Saudi and UAE and Oman. So anyway, this is what I'm seeing is like, you know, we have such our approach to risk is diversification, both currency diversification, geographic diversification, and sector.
You brought up a good point. I was talking about China and the US, but the GCC is this force now. And we actually met Mamadou in Abu Dhabi, then we were in Riyadh. We are now about to be partnered on a very large conference in Riyadh at the end of the year.
But you also introduced us to Roberta.
Right, well, that's who we're doing it. Roberta Coloresi, who Italian, married an Emirati, been part of lots of systems, building the infrastructure there. So I think it's an interesting, definitely for Africa. It used to be London, I would have said, where they would have more insights, and I think that's shifted to GCC.
It has shifted, but we're glad that a lot of the GCC leaders have a home in London, and we're certainly working that when they come to Knightsbridge or Mayfair in the summer. We'll be certainly, you know, hosting them here, and you know, quite a few of our founders have. There's one member of the team in the US or the UK.
And,
so, you know,
and she mentioned that Amir's doing AI, like a venture studio in Los Angeles. And there's also Venturo's here, they're ex-Mubadala guys. So there's a lot of connectivity to build these bridges if we all come together.
I think
and Mark, just on the, the currency risk. So Amir was really astute. I had like a 5 to 7 year plan. Many of our companies are expanding into the GCC, a couple into Pakistan, but he's created systems to help companies, through the enterprise customer relationships he has in the US to use African tech talent and business models for tech innovation and bring it into US companies. And that's obviously going to dramatically change the game in terms of these companies' performance over time. Not everyone's ready to do that, but he has colleagues all over the U.S., Boston, Middle Atlantic states, and the South. So anyway, and we connected also around Endeavor. So I'm sure some people on the call are familiar with the Endeavor Global Entrepreneur Network.
Yeah, it's great network.
Headquartered in New York and super active in Africa and Asia and Latin America. So Endeavor is another important ecosystem player, again, in terms of providing connectivity and global capital and a learning community, right? This is, 361 is an amazing learning community, and Endeavor is too, and Launch Africa has built this global learning community of investors and founders and family offices.
But as you're talking about these ancillary high efficiency plugins and engines, we should let Medici just explain a little bit how they're changing titling, because this is a great example of bringing amazing efficiency to all these different countries. So I don't want to lose that opportunity while you guys are here.
This is Bill doing his segue here.
The transition.
Here we go.
I don't know how much we're doing next to Ubuntu and others, but the first layer, the foundational layer, is knowing who owns what. And in Africa, nobody knows who owns what. They don't even have addresses. So that's what we're trying to resolve. So we actually have contracts. So we're underground. We knocked on 500,000 homes in Zambia, for example. Physically, and surveyed all of the land. And we've now issued over 120,000 titles, out of which our reach was 56% to women from 18%, and from the low teens before that. So for us, it's just a practical thing to do and get done. And technology nowadays allows it. So we're using our own proprietary drones, as well as tablets to collect the data, and using general boundary as instead of surveying every single property, and then doing pre-vectorization and going deep down. I can go through, very deep into this, and I can keep it high level. But I think what has by 2050, 1/3 of every single person walking this earth is going to be African. And population growth is in Africa. So the focus has to be Africa. Africa has the resources. It's Mother Africa. We came from Africa. We're going to go back to Africa. So for us, it has been that if you have a model that you could replicate. So this is, by the way, the first private sector initiative. These projects are usually World Bank. The reason we came into Africa is 2018, after I left Hernando de Soto, I realized that the only way you can do this is a top-down approach and working with governments. So the World Bank took us to Zambia and Rwanda, and we signed MOUs in both countries to do free pilots and to show the socioeconomic impact of those pilots. And on that basis, the World Bank would finance us. We did that in both countries, and the World Bank said, we're out, we're not financing anything, you're on your own. So we went and did a PPP with them, a public-private partnership. And that's how we got into the market, and they pay us a fee per title, where we charge $50 per title we issue. Everybody's happy, right? Because the person now owns a property that they have, it's valued 10x to 100x, depending where the property is located, out of town or in town. 2, the government's collecting taxes and they know who lives where. 3, the local government now has an incentive to provide services, because now this guy is an owner occupier that can actually pay those taxes and collect the ground rents, or what you call your home taxes when it comes to the property taxes and such. So it's a multi-layered thing. And at the same time, if you're going to do resources, there's also the surface rights. Before you get into resources, you have a mining right, you have to drill somewhere. Somebody's living somewhere where you're drilling, unless you're doing it outside town. So it's very important to also secure that and make it very clear. And the way we do it is we put all of it on the blockchain. and we secure it that way, and then we can look at other ways. So we actually are talking to Ubuntu about what they're offering and how we can work and partner together. And we've done other projects with FAO, Food Agriculture Organization, with the UN. We've done the mapping of the border. Another disputes for land is the disputes between countries. So we've mapped the border between Zambia and Congo for them using LiDAR as well. And now we're doing Guyana. So we got hired to do Guyana. Guyana is one of the richest countries in the world per capita because of the resources they have now. They're producing 600,000 barrels a day, and they're growing very, very fast with only 1 million people. So we're working there. And then we brought the technology back to the US, where we started here as a company, where we did blockchain title deeds in Wyoming, and we did a pilot with New York City for deed fraud and blockchain. And now we're working on the issue of the same issue, which is vacant housing. For every 28 homeless person, every homeless person, there's 28 vacant homes. So that's another problem that America is facing in the major cities. We have more and more homelessness. We have more and more people on the streets. And we have this big disparity and gap in America as well. And the people that are most affected are people of color and minorities. 43% in America of African Americans own their property, while 73% of white people own their property. So it's a big disparity that needs to be resolved. So now we have a contract with Baltimore, put it all on chain, and working with Fidelity Title Insurance to be able to then give them that data to issue the title insurance and remove those frictions and do it once and for all. And then do the tokenization that Ramadan has been talking about. Now we do it for ownership and make it more affordable in the US for people to own. In Africa, technology is not a problem. So we created a paperless system in Rwanda where two people using non-smartphones can buy and sell their properties on their phones. And it's not that technology, the adoption that we got in Africa is much faster. So as far as risk mitigation, question for you that you asked, Zareen, it's not the question of risk mitigation. The people want to do development and technology. In our case, I mean, government has paid us so far $8 million in Zambia for the work we've done. So if something that makes value, then they'll pay you. But if you're coming to extract resources and then you're gonna have to share the pot, and there's bribery and all of this. But if you're doing the right thing and doing it right, they're incentivized to pay you because the project speaks for itself. And when you're bringing value and something to the African continent, irrespective of the country, it's human nature. When they see you making money from extracting from people, bringing sugar and selling it, and they know you're making too much money selling that sugar because it's cost so much cheaper from Brazil to ship it, or you're actually building something and charging them for it versus you're actually giving a service where you're providing ownership for the first time for these people, and they are incentivized to keep you going. So, and the government we've had 2 transitional governments for us in Zambia. We've worked in Liberia, we've worked in Rwanda. We're talking to Congo, we're talking to the Nigerian government, where they're calling us. I'm not calling them. When are you coming to do this? So I don't know if that.
Can I ask, have you crossed paths with Ross Michelle and her trust? Because they were super focused on land rights and especially how it affects women.
No. Would love to connect with her because we're actually doing real world applications.
Well, and one of the Ross Michelle Trust people was the former Zambian central bank deputy governor. So there were amazing people in Zambia in our network. So Mark can definitely share, my details, but let us take this on.
I would love to. I mean, we have a big office in Zambia. We have an average. We had about 300 people now. We have about 87 working there, people full time, and we're knocking on people's doors every day. And you can check out the website MLG Zambia. That's specific just for Zambia. Okay. And it tells you everything you need to know about land titling and Zambia. And then it's very interesting.
One thing that I forgot to mention is that we are 5 years overdue for our own Africa tour. And we've been talking individually about this. So we want to, and I don't want to talk about it for the next 5 years. I want to do it in the next 5 months in the form of at least an advanced tour. So we can sort of bring this to life, shed light on this, and then bring as many people as we can. So Launch Africa is our first Africa client. Again, they cover 22 countries, and they came through. It's relationship chain. We're getting the others here. Bill, thanks to Bill. So we would like to mobilize that because it's one thing to have all these Zooms, but if we could all actually get together there and look, it takes a village. So really, it's about us mobilizing and putting a schedule. Just like we're going to Palo Alto, then we added San Francisco the night before. Now we got Berkeley, going to Stanford. Now we're going to this family club, this 100-year-old club, which I just found out because of the Bohemian Club was censoring. So they was the Hearst, 14 journalists. Well, interesting things. Who knows? We just got to get over to Africa, and the same thing's going to happen. You're gonna take us to the most innovative companies and funds, and we're gonna shake the tree together. Things are gonna come out of it, and then we'll build that bridge to Riyadh and GCC. We just want to catalyze this. I think we got to get over there. And Bill, you've been great. You got to get over there. You got to.
And I heard several people say Kenya and great places to go, so that has to be on the tour.
Yeah, I mean, David Solomon mentioned Equity Holdings Group, who both Ubuntu and David are tied closely to. They're having almost missions over there for executives to come see every month. And I think Prosper Africa, Ramadan, I think she just left today, right? With a whole group of family offices.
She's leaving tomorrow. I suspect that we could probably have a conversation with them. My suspicion is that they're probably going to be asking with like, do you already have exposure to Africa? What is the likelihood and probability of you deploying capital to Africa? And if those are overwhelmingly high, I think it'll be a lot easier for us to have that conversation with them. If not, then like Ubuntu goes to Africa. I go to Africa every month, sometimes twice a month. So, in that sense, like I'll take anybody with me. But if I can volunteer myself to be a part of the team, I personally would start with who's going and what industries are you exposed to and what countries you want to see, and then from there we could build a tour around the people that are already going, so it's a bit more customized.
Yeah, and industry verticals are good. And by the way, I was with a family office that is in mining and minerals. It's called Traxxas. Which is now Carlyle owned. Actually, they just did another recap. And we were doing ports in Mozambique, and we were part of that trading supply chain. We had investments in South Africa. We did phosphates out of Morocco, Togo. Like we've done some of these markets. But to your point, it's like if they're already there, but then you take, we were just with Ron Lauder and he with Parsons, they had a run for a while at the sort of growth equity. And I think we just need to figure out who's interested. I mean, someone like Eddie, I don't know if you've got your verticals, but you're looking at different, ag tech.
I'll definitely come. I'm looking at ag tech opportunities in Africa, which are plenty and fall right into the mission and the mandate.
I mean,
we're all doing
fintech. While we're on ag tech, I mean, I don't know if you could talk a little bit about
beginning to partner up.
But talk about producers for a minute.
Thanks, Bill. You read my mind. So sometimes in Africa, you get these very near and present opportunities, which would be somewhat of an anomaly in the Western world. And one of them is right now, we've just packaged up the deal room and everything else, where there's 300,000 women farmers in Ghana and Togo, share harvesters, fruit tree planters. Now, they have the offtake agreements from Whole Foods and national retailers, Sprouts, others, 46 different SKUs into there. They've received these orders from them. But they received them this last week, and they've only got their deal room and everything together, because you can imagine what it's like recently. And they, because of the planting season, they need to be planting now, like literally. Okay. So you get these interesting situations where when you're familiar with what we're doing and when you're familiar with, it's not just the resources. Everything is driven by the agriculture on the ground that's delivering value for the people, that's enabling them to go from that place of where they're on $3 per day, and the agriculture with groups like Producers Trust gets them to like $10 per day. Medici essentially giving them the land rights and the wealth creation there gets them to values where they're around $20 to $30 a day. Then they're integrating into communities and services. Then they get a voice and a share of their economies as part of the resources where Ubuntu is doing the 80 to 90%. Then you're looking at actually people going through it from one of the lowest bases to actually quite wealthy within several years. And so projects like, if anyone wants to see Producers Trust, McKinsey recently said that this group is not just going to be a unicorn, it's a decacorn, and they're going to flood money into them. They're going to their Series A for 100 million, and they have some very clear near-term opportunities within our primary regions, within Ghana, within Uganda, that have been de-risked. I mean, you got US national retailers that are buying in. There's already 50 to 60 million of revenues on their other product lines. But these are the kind of situations you have in Africa. And the more you understand the market and the more you understand what's going on, you're able to obviously generate good returns, but you're also able to get involved in projects that have huge impact. 300,000 women farmers, that's 1.2 to 1.5 million people, and it's almost idiot proof, the deal. And if you look at the visuals, bah, they rock. Anyone want to set up a call on that one?
Margaret, is that something Launch Africa could look at? Is it tech scalable enough?
Yeah. So we do kind of supply chain management, so connecting the farmers to market, so many different parts of food security. And Junaid Duplessis, one of the founding partners, had the single most successful Women in Rural Africa Fund, Impact Fund, that was
5 to 35.
Yeah. No. This was 15 years ago. So many of the rural agricultural businesses that he helped to commercialize and are very sustainable. So it brings a lot of understanding of the challenges and opportunities, and then we bring in the tech enablement to get the product to market appropriately, and lots of finance and education.
Could you look at what he's just describing?
Well,
Yeah,
can I make a question very simple? Are you trying? This is in like finance language. Are you trying to factor a purchase order from Whole Foods? Is that I'm trying to simplify
about 3 to 4 weeks from factoring if they could wait a month.
I mean,
they could factor
conceptually.
They could factor a purchase order in about 3 to 4 weeks. Right now, we have different investors that are going to give them the capital for their seeds so they can get planting. But I'm just giving you an example. If they could factor the purchase order, and now they're just still going through. They've received the initial orders and everything else, but they need to be official purchase orders, everything else, in order to factor them.
You need something before that. Okay.
Yeah, a couple. Well, they do. But what I would say is with this group is a that's a very interesting opportunity, and that's something that Prosper Africa is right up their street. But it's always the case where you're looking at different investment cycles as to when people can participate. But in terms of Ubuntu and BES, that's really over the coming few months. That's really the one where you're looking at a structure that really I believe is going to be managing well over several trillion in assets within the next 5 to 6 years, impacting tens of millions of lives, and fundamentally underpinned by solid projects like the one that I described in agriculture, in resources, in housing, with groups like Medici and others. We have the initial, as I said, 1 billion essentially verbally promised. We're going through the contracts and everything else like that. Very solid partner. The opportunity with ourselves is around 30 million between Ubuntu and BES. We're looking at potentially a convertible note structure where you can exit safe note that comes at a discount to.
I just have to stop you because we can't talk about deals. But
we can't talk about deals. Okay, leave that. Sorry, scratch that then.
we can in another setting.
Okay.
But all good. You've sort of, this was good to throw the cards on the table.
Maybe set up a separate Africa chat and group on this initiative.
Yes. Yeah.
Because there are going to be many people are interested in.
Yeah. So there are other. So we're trying to build up funds along the way from both accelerators and then the seeds like Launch Africa, and then go to the other asset classes. We prefer funds to deals to build the ecosystem, but then we want to bring in. In fact, right now we've got a deal through our London is an African owner of a banking. He has 10 million banking customers, and I can't really describe what he's about to do, but he's doing something innovative with a major global company. So we're starting to touch, the real deep pocket African entrepreneurs as well.
That's great. That's great. Well, when you're talking there about Mark funds, what Mamadou and Ramadan have done so beautifully is how they've de-risked through a Luxembourg fund structure. And what we're putting together is this gem fund between the two. And really, honestly,
ownership thing.
Tip my hat to them in terms of how they know how to structure and do all these things. That's really Ramadan's area.
You can look it up.
Ramana, where are you right now?
Different
Physically?
ownership of housing and what.
You're on mute or something.
I'm here.
You're on.
Get here.
I mean, what is that?
I'm at Reagan National Airport.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Sorry.
Fair enough. I was thinking you might be.
That might be what?
You might be close to us, actually. I was like, come on over. But you're not. Any other? But we didn't do our fun facts this time.
Well, just one big fun fact. That's the way you should look at it.
Yeah, this is one big collective fun fact. Anyone else have comments or questions on this?
I mean, I can sort of offer a fun fact on Africa is going to have the largest population, as Ali mentioned, and that means the largest population, just like many population explosions, you're going to have a need to effectively offer resources in a booming economy, and so the fact is that you're not there, right? And that's not so fun, but the fact is that you probably will be, right? And do it with people you know, and do it early, and do it soon, right? That's the fun fact. How's that for a fact? Is it scary?
And it works. Qualifies. Anyone else? Question or comment before we break?
No.
Great, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for putting everybody together.
Yeah, thank Bill. Although Bill's, I need to put a ribbon. I need to find Bill. He'll put a ribbon on this. 1 second.
I'll be back later tonight. So if you want to catch up tomorrow, we can kind of catch up Friday.
Sure.
Okay.
Pleasure meeting everyone. I think it's great. I'm glad that you guys. I mean, every time I tell people I want about Africa, they run away. So I'm glad none of you
just ran in when you heard the word.
I'm glad nobody's running away because I got tired. I got hair growing on my tongue from talking about Africa and nobody listening. So I'm glad that there's someone in the audience that thinks.
Well, you have to have a long-term,
like-minded thing.
Long-term perspective. And not being a risk-on perspective.
Everybody wants to make money now. Nobody wants to wait 5 years to make money. It's a problem.
No, the economy is good. And
you know what some of the best, but I don't know, is Margaret still around? But like her fund is doing extremely well. But if you have a piece of her fund for the next several vintages, it's your retirement plan. Huge. upside potential. And I just need to digest what you guys are doing so I can size it up for myself and for others. We're just trying to find the top tier companies and founders and funds to associate with.